Okay. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone had a wonderful Pesach and Chag Sameach. Um, just want to speak out maybe an idea or two regarding chol hamoed. Some fascinating insights and ideas regarding the chashivas of chol hamoed, and really how it uh, how it contributes to the overall holiday, and what it really means. Um, so a famous mission Avos as a Medaimer Bachasa Kachim Vazis Amayadais, Shav the Kharab Rabin, maybe Bish of Ravino of Shalim, the Galpana Tashla, Bishish Bilatamas in the Khakom. So we know that it says that someone who's Mavasa the Mayadais, who disgraces the Mayadais, that is someone who doesn't get a Khakom. And Bartanoi tells us that the Indian of Mavazes Hamoed is Yom Shechol Hamoed. Right, the days that we're in right now, the days of Chol Hamoed. If you Mavazeh them, you put them down. He says there's two options for what this could mean. Either it could be Oisa Behen Melacha, right? You do work in them. In other words, you do work which is not permitted by Chazal, which means it's work that wasn't, um, that's not considered a hefsid if not done. Or you're not even minachol. In other words, you don't set the table, you don't make a nice meal every single day of chol hamoed. You don't say amaitzi. You just it's like it's another regular day. You're just doing your thing, nashing. You don't not kaveh suda to show the chashivas for the day. So one of those two options, if you do one of those two things on chol hamoed, either malacha or you don't show chashivas to it through kiviyas of achila and shtia. So even if you have Torah Ma'asim Tovim, Ein lechilek olam haba. You don't have a chilek olam haba. So l'chayra, it's a pliya. I mean, it's really a bit of a pliya because this is not a very understood idea. Well, what does this mean? How could this be? I mean, you're putting on a level of ma'obnei chaver barabim. Okay, maybe Rishis Avram Avinu. That means that you don't get a bris milah. Okay, I mean, how a megal punish the b'nei shakalacha means that you say pshat in the Torah wrong on purpose. It's like how do these things? How does not being mavaz the moyed, not setting your table or doing malacha on a moyed? How does it equate to this? It's hard to understand what it means. And I guess the other question is that what is this Indian of bizui? In other words, how do we understand this concept of bizui in contrast to just someone not being observant, not doing the chol hamoed? What is this idea of bizui? And why is that an assumed mechanism? That Chazal are saying legabe chol hamoed. Then you go weiter, and you have a Gemara Psachim. Gemara Psachim says that says over here. It says Amar Sheishish Mishum Blaza ben Azariah. It says Kol Mavazes Amoyades Kilo Abed Avodah Shneimar Eloi Kemasech Eloi Saselach. So again, l'chayra, you have a very, very, a very radical, so to speak, simply speaking, statement. L'gabe chol hamoed. Someone not only he doesn't get a chilek on haba, in addition to that, it's as if he's worshiping idols. If he doesn't, he's out of the moedus. And the Rishonim here say the same pshat, as in the Mishnah and others. That it's mamish. If you're mevazah moedus, it's as if you're worshiping idols. I mean, Chazal don't say that about everything. I mean, they say it about very big ikarim, Shabbos. They talk about it lashon hara. It's talked about. I mean, but you know chol hamoed, you're mevazah the moedus. You don't set your table on chol hamoed. Or you do malacha that wouldn't be a hefsed in chol hamoed. That's Ovid Avodah Zarah. It's a very extreme thing to say. What is the simple pshat and why Chazal are taking such a hard line stance on this Indian, and what does a taka mean? Other thing that's very interesting is that we see in the Gemara in Chagiga. The Gemara in Chagiga says, it asks, where do we know from that chol hamoed is asur b'melacha? And it says the first answer is Chag HaMatzah Tishmor Shivas Yamim. Chol hamoed she'asur b'asiyas melacha. There's other makaris, but the first answer is that because the pasuk says it's Chag HaMatzah Tishmor, it says you should keep the Chag HaMatzah Tishmor, and then it says Shivas Yamim. So even though in the Trop you don't read it that way, it says Chag HaMatzah is Tishmor, and then it's Shivas Yamim, so it's really not connected. But Chazal are basically slicing up the pasuk in a drustica fashion to teach you the lesson that it's to read it as Chag HaMatzah Tishmor Shivas Yamim. Keep the Chag HaMatzah for 7 days, and right before, and this it's samuch to that Elokim Masechal Isaselach. Samuch to that is Elokim Masechal Isaselach, and therefore we see that if you're mevaz hamoed, it's as if you worship Avodah Zarah. But this is the makar. So l'chayra, it's interesting to note and to ask that it's very interesting. Why is it and how is it that we understand the isser of malacha and chol hamoed bedafka from Pesach, and bedafka from it being called Chag HaMatzos, meaning chol hamoed obviously is a time that also applies to Sukkot, and therefore chol hamoed is not only an inyan on Pesach, and certainly the idea of it being called Chag HaMatzos, so chol hamoed by Sukkot as well as Asur, because of the fact that chol hamoed is called Chag HaMatzos. The Gemara, the Rishonim in the Gemara don't speak out here. This is referring only to chol hamoed Pesach. It's referring to chol hamoed in general, and still the Makara is because of Chag HaMatzos Tishmor. Chag HaMatzos Tishmor is not referring to Sukkot. How would it be referring to Sukkot? It's very schwer. The Gemara clearly implies that it's referring to all chol hamoed, not chol hamoed dafka Pesach. And then even within that, it's interesting to understand why is it that it's Asur out the fact that it's called Chag HaMatzos. Meaning the reason why chol hamoed is Asur, and this is true even by Sukkot, is because chol hamoed is called the holiday of Matzos. That's why it's Asur. That's the simple implication of what it is that you see before you. And this is the Mekar. Because it says Chag HaMatzos Tishmor Shivas Yamim. So those are the essential questions over here. And say a teretz, hopefully we can understand Shubbadik Inyan. And the teretz starts as follows. We know that there are two different types of kedushos, of times of holiness, and therefore manners of holiness, in which the Jewish people relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Two mechanisms. The first one is Shabbos, Yom Kippur, and those two are the aside of Kaviyah V'Kaima. In other words, that there is an external reality of Kedusha contained within the Yom, within the time, and that level of Kedusha is, brought to us by the idea that now is the time that contains the Kedusha, and then we relate to the Kedusha. So there is us, there's the Kedusha, and now we are relating to the Kedusha at Shabbos and Yom Kippur. What we have in the concept of Moed, as we explained in our pshat in the Kiddush of Moedim L'Simcha, and we're saying Chol Shel Moed, is the aside that it is true that Chol Moed is not Asur in all Malacha like a regular Yom Tov is, and that the Iker days of Pesach are the first and the last. That is true. But what it's also true is that the days in between are entirely Moed. And we explained that the concept of Moed is the aside that a Moed is a period in which the Jewish people are meant to meet up with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the expression of a specific idea which is essential to the overall identity of the Jewish nation. So, in Pesach, that is the Zman Cherusenu, there is a midah, there is a midah on Pesach through which we are meant to relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that midah is Cherus, and that is what the moed is nigba for. However, what is very important to understand is that in a very real way, Yom Tiv and and chol hamoed are a much, much deeper connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of the fact that they are not kviya v'kaima, they are not set kedushos. Meaning that we say, Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim, meaning that we are the ones that create the kedusha. Because what that essentially means is, if we take time to consider what that means, essentially what it means is that we are relating to HaKadosh, we're not relating to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as an act of relating to something which is objective or outside of us, but rather it is through our own self-expression itself, our self-expression itself is and brings us to a place that is close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is in meeting and in the same presence, in the same, so to speak, room as God, because of the fact that we are expressing ourselves within the Midah. In other words, essentially what I'm tinying is, and it's a very interesting idea, and I think it's true, I'm tinying that the aside of a moed and the manner in which we make a moed is a geder. It is within the same umbrella as mahu afata. Just like you have to be diamond HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through doing certain midos, through doing certain actions, being chesed, etc. The geder of the way that we connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a moed is by embracing a specific midah that we achieved in the time of the Chag, of the Moed, and it is through the fact that we are now more deeply expressed within that midah that brings us to a state in which that state is closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because we are more similar to Him. So, in our case, in Chag Matzos, in Zman Cherusenu, the idea of, it's obvious that this is true because a person can't even begin to relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu if he doesn't have a solidified, independent sense of identity. Right? So it's the case that if a person, as we talked about the Haggadah, you do Haggadah and you establish and you concretize a sense of independent identity, and you connect that to the mitzvahs and you embrace the mitzvahs of what you are in the most underlying fashion, which is the mitzvah of Haggadah. So of course that will bring you to a state of being in which that state of being you are now closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as we know from the Medrash and Chazal, I won't show it to you right now, but it's a davar yedua, and we spoke about this in the past. We learned it from Avraham Avinu that the Chazal say gadol hachnasas orchem yoisim mekabalas pnei shchina. It is greater doing hachnasas orchem yoisim mekabalas pnei shchina. We learned it from Avraham Avinu, and we spoke about this in the past, and basically underscored the idea that it is greater to be similar to God than to relate to Him. So what that means is that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a mode of self-expression through which, when we express ourselves in that specific fashion, we are more similar to Him, and therefore it is a situation in which we meet up, because we now came close to Him through being this way, meaning being b'nei chayrin, that is a greater relationship and a greater sense of connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu than if there is an objective Kedusha, let's say on Shabbos, and then we relate to that Kedusha. So, Mimela, the idea over here is very, very good. The pshat of this Mishnah is essentially, these are really things that are not be'etzem isurim, at least most of them. They're not be'etzem isurim. The only thing is, what they are is they're ways in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us the opportunity to relate to Him through the establishment of certain kedushos, and when we violate that, we are violating a manner through which we ourselves are meant to express ourselves to be closer to Him. So, right, mechalas takachim, you bring it lidei noiser. And maybe kachim shbech lidei pigo v'noiser v'tamei. That's one thing. Made for Bishop Mavinu. Right? So you're Moshech Arlasa. What is the common denominator here? The common denominator is that it's all things that what you're doing is you're violating an idea which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to you as a manner through which you should express yourself to be on a level of closeness to Him. So this is not exaggeratory. When we say, and this is something also we spoke about in the past, when we say that what do we mean? And this is what that means is like this. As we know, there's a concept of schar mitzvah, right? That the schar mitzvah. What does that mean? That means that the idea, and we're not going to get into this whole yesod now, but we'll just say it quickly. The idea of the schar of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself, because of the fact that the consequence of doing a mitzvah is a sense of development and investment into a perspective on the world and an identity level, which now has a deeper investment and connection into the underlying perspective which drives that mitzvah. So essentially the way it works is that there is going to be in the world to come a revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and mitzvahs are opportunities for people to invest in their relationship with God. And the more invested you are in something, the more you're going to get when the thing yields return. Same thing with stock market, same thing with the business, same thing with anything. You invest, X amount, when the thing is successful, you get a higher yield on your investment. So the same thing happens with this Chametz mitzvah. You invest in a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in a sense of self that is closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore when HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals Himself, when the company takes off and is ultra successful, your level of investment will quadruple, double, whatever it is, based off how much you invested. So the aside of Ein L'Chilek Olam Haba, and what it means is that a person who has done these things, he has withdrawn himself in a very, very underlying way from being able to be someone whom is close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through his own self-expression, which means that he cannot have a Chilek Olam Haba. Because a Chilek Olam Haba just means how much have I invested in my life into HaKadosh Baruch Hu, my relationship with Him, how similar am I to Him, so that when He reveals Himself, that's the same exact manner in which I can appreciate it. So it's just like anything else. If you devote to learning about, wine tasting, etc., when you taste the wine, there is a million details that you see and feel and taste in the tasting of the wine because you're a connoisseur and you have an appreciation for wine. So therefore, then Mela, your experience is unbelievably more pleasurable than someone who doesn't know anything about wine tasting, and therefore it's a very simple You just taste it in like, oh, whatever, it's good, it's bad, it's sweet, it's not sweet, whatever. The unsophisticated taste bud tastes. It's the exact same idea. Each different mitzvah has a different manifestation, different way to invest in a Kadosh Baruch Hu, to bring yourself closer to Him, so that when He reveals Himself, you can say, wow, and you can appreciate it in this manner, in the mitzvah, in that manner of a mitzvah, in this idea, this. So therefore, it's the same exact thing. If you do one of these things, you say pshat specifically wrong, I mean, you take what was supposed to be your chelik and you pervert it. Same thing. You're mefer b'shav amavino, the most basic self-expression of a yid. You're mefer, etc., etc. You go, but this fits into that category because that is exactly what you're doing. You're taking an avenue which is meant to be an avenue of self-expression for you to concretize yourself in a manner in which the state of being post-concretization is a state of being in which you are more similar to God. Hence, you have the ability to appreciate Him when He reveals Himself. That time being, Olam Haba. Therefore, if you are mevaza the moedas, which is meant to be a time in which you take the opportunity to increase investment and identity and awareness of the concept of cherus in this case, or in simcha on Sukkot, thereby making yourself more similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, thereby enhancing your ability to appreciate Him when He reveals Himself. If you violate that and you disgrace it and you put it down, you don't show it the od chashivus. What that means is that you're not going to have a chelik in Olam Haba, because that is the whole point of having given it to you. And now we'll go to explain as well the kilo eved avodah zarah. You go to the pasuk, the mechuter de Rishon Yochai says like this. He says, I want to focus your attention on this word, nitfal. Nitfal is in contrast to the Gemara's lashon of kilu oifed avazar. The Rambam brings the same lashon as well of nitfal. The idea of nitfal means to become tafel too. You become secondary, and or it means that you are now dealing with. You're now in the realm of that thing. So when you say ki'ilu oived avazara, what is the ki'ilu? The aside is the same aside. In other words, that the megala, it's megala milsa on you, on the person, his complete lack of sensitivity for this time which was set aside for him to be able to express himself, and thereby give him a sense, give him a opportunity to concretize himself, on which the result would be that he is closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When he's mavaza that, he is nitzvah, it becomes tafel to avodah zarah. In other words, that he operates within a realm of placement of importance and priority, which is fabricated, which is not real. So when we say that you're kiyum nitzvah avodah zarah, we're not saying, oh, it's as if you went and you bowed down. That's just the way in which they used to do it, because they had the extreme aspect of it. And this is it's a very well known idea that the aside of kiyum avodah zarah for Shabbos Manazeh is a misaligning of priorities. In other words, you give chashivus to something which is not it doesn't have any objective reality to it, and you give that emotional investment or excitement or a sense of, you give it a chilik in what you are. So if I start talking to you about this game and this shot and that shot, and then the person gets excited about things which have no meaning whatsoever and are completely meaningless and useless, what that means is that you gave that completely false, fake, meaningless, idea a chelik of you. Because if not, you wouldn't be getting excited about it. So in other words, when someone is mezvas le'mayadis, and they do the Yitzer Malacha, so that means that they're prioritizing their Malacha over a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or you're not koveh chil v'shtir properly. So whatever that means, it could mean anything else. It doesn't really matter. The point is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is koveh for you a time in which you express yourself in these ways of not doing malacha and being koveh chil v'shtir. These are the manners in which you show chashivas to this time, and that is what you should be doing in this time, not anything else. So anything else that you're doing, which will negate these two ways in which you show chashivas to the mayid, is as if you're being avodah to those things. So whether it's you're working, whether it's you're trying to save money, whether it's you just don't care about the mayid to give it the chashivas that it demands, whatever it might be. So therefore it's yourself, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. It's as if you are Oved Avodah Zarah. And your nitpal Avodah Zarah, in other words, you become a tafel to it, which means that your entire apparatus, the entire way that you operate, has no connection to the reality whatsoever. Now, I want to go to try to answer the last question. The last question we had was that why is it eschag hamatzos? What's the deal with eschag hamatzos that gives us this idea that that all Isra Malacha Mayid is learned from Chag HaMatzos, and also the Kila Abed Avazar is learned from the Chag HaMatzos. So what is so special about matzah and the Chag of Matzos, which is called that because of the matzah, that makes it that it should be the Makar for Isra Malacha and Chol Mayid, and that also makes it that if you don't do it, that's as if you're worshiping a Avodah Zarah. So, in order to answer that question, if you look over here, and you say this nagad, matzah shanu oichem ashuma, so Hashem shehispik b'tzeish navasim lahachmitz, shaloi hispik, ach nigla le melech malchei hamelachim hakadosh baruch hu u'ga'alam. So if you read this correctly, what you have is a very, very fascinating idea, because when we talk about the Agada and Geula, blah blah blah, we were saying all these things. What does Geula actually happen? What does Geula actually mean? Does Geula mean that they stopped working? Like Hakadosh Baruch Hu made them stop working? No, because L'chaira, that already happened after the third Makkah. Does Geula mean that they left the physical base of Mitzrayim? L'chaira, not either, because it says over here. What does it say over here? That they were Gorishu Mitzrayim. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu redeems them, what is the taich of them being redeemed? And what you see over here is a pliya, because the Haggadah is telling you when the Geula actually happened. Because what does it say? It says that they were on their way out of Mitzrayim, so they're already kicked out. Now they're on their way out, and their batzik was not didn't finish being machmitz, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is nigla lihem ugalam, and he redeemed them. So what happened in that moment? I mean, what does it mean? What actually occurred? So what we have to understand is that the aside of Geula, and therefore matzah as representing this event, is that the aside of Geula is simply that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is nigla on you, and he takes you to be his. And he is koirei, he puts his name upon you, and he says, he displays the idea that these people are now a chelik of me. They are my people. So the taich of the idea of Geula, to be nig'al, means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is niglas. What's this right here? I'm not making this up. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is nigla aleim, machem lachem, and he's goyal them, and he does this act of gula. What does that mean? It means that he embraces them and he puts them in a state in which they are under his auspices and only under his auspices, and they become his nation. So the concept of Geula is essentially the establishment of kirva, of closeness to the nation and to the individual. And the one of the ways to know this, again, I'm not going to show it to you now, but there's a halacha by Geula, by a Geula of an Eved, and by Geula Sadeh, that it has the Geula should occur, and the Torah uses the same lashon over there, by the Karav Koidim. That the Karav, the person who's closest relative to the individual, should do the Geula. And so you see it over there, but actually you see it in a Viter Inyan. What you see it over here. And this is a pliasdika thing. Says the Gemara in Kedushin, it says, Bnei Yisrael achlu es haman, arba'im shana. It says, Bnei Yisrael ate the man arba'im shana. Now, the man we know for a fact is the aside that the Jewish people were in the lap of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, there's ein lecha, status gedol mizu of being simply embraced and loved and just completely, absolutely encompassed by God, besides from the man. Because what does that mean? That means that there was a period in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu literally sustained the Jewish people with food of malachim. So, and the Gemara says, "Lo nitan tarel eladar shel eichli haman bilvad." Right, and that's a famous aside, that the idea of the man is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly supported the Jewish people for 40 years. And that is, there's no greater concept and feeling than that, of you are mine, than here I'm literally supporting you, giving you food that I usually give to malachim, which are celestial beings that don't have any sense of their own self, rather are completely devoted to the expression of me. I'm giving you that same food. So Gemara asks, did the Jewish people eat the man for 40 years? Because it was 30 days until the event that the man came down. The Gemara says, "Please take a zach. Elolay marlach, ugois shehoitziu mimitzrayim, tamu bahem taman." It's unbelievable. The Gemara is telling you the ugois, in other words, the matzah that take out of Mitzrayim, they had in them a taman. What does this mean? What does this mean that the ugois, in other words, the matzahs that they bought out, had a taman in them? What does that mean? What that means is that in the moment that we see here, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was nigla aleihem and was goyal them, immediately the taman went into their batzek. Ugois matzai. See, there's the uga. It's the uga. The ugois matzai is kilei chametz. There was taman in those ugois, and that's why it says they ate it for 40 years. Why was there taman? That's why there was taman, because the side of Geula is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the being that sustains you. You are his. HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes you his. He scoops you up and he's goyal you. He takes you to be his. So instead of being avadim of Mitzrayim, instead of being in Egypt and the Egyptians, we belong to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the Yisod. Literally, HaKadosh Baruch Hu embraces us, takes us in his embrace, and states to us with the Taman and to the world with the whole display that we are his people and that he loves us. And that is the taich of Geula. And that's why there was Taman in these Ugois Matzais. And that's the Gemara Kedushin says. There was literally Ta'aman in the Ugois Matzais. And therefore, that is why Eschag HaMatzos Teshmar Shevas Yamim is the basis for the concept of the chol hamoed being aser b'melacha. Because the whole yesod is that this is the time in which it was established that we are the people of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and our mode of self-expression in and of itself is a kirva and is meant to be as a kirva to Him. We are karev to Him. This is when that happened. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu was goyel us, is the time that we transformed from being a stam nation of people into being a people that are be'etzem, close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, belong to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And an expression of the fact that we be'etzem belong to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that the midos through which we express ourselves make us closer to Him. The specific midah that belongs to Pesach is Cheres. But by Sukkot it's the same idea. There is a midah. We express ourselves through that midah, and that midah makes us belong to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, be in a moed, in a meeting, in a place of oneness, of closeness to God, which is what it means. Ayel moed, being moed. And that is why it's learned from here, and that's why it's Chag HaMatzos, because Chag HaMatzos is when we became close to God. When you're nigal, when you're goyal someone, you become karev to them. They become karev to you. And that is what it says in Psukim in Mishnah Torah. L'kachas legoy mikarev goy, masois b'seis mefsir v'chama. Right, that's the Garm are going to say that there's kimi goy, I think it says mefurish in the pasuk. No way. That's crazy. I think the pasuk actually says what I'm saying mefurish in Mishnah Torah. I think it says mefurish. It says kimi goy gadol asher loy elokim wow, plistic. Kimi goy gadol asher loy elokim keroivim ilav kashem elokeinu b'chol koreinu ilav. So that's what it says. And that is in the context of okay, so it's a little bit later on in this parsha that it talks about the idea of l'kachas legoy mikerev goy. But this is the aside that we have an Elokim, which is keroivim elav. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is close to us. That is the concept over here. And therefore, lamaskana, just to wrap up the idea over here and the life lesson and the understanding, the idea and the life lesson and understanding are that chol hamoed and the concept of moed is an opportunity for us to express ourselves within a midah. And practically what that means is that you do things that contribute to your expression in that fashion of cherus. So it could be limud Torah, it could be learning what cherus means, it could be learning, being chayker in your own identity and trying to analyze and understand whether you do identify in fact as a ben chayrin, or are you an eved to the things around you. There's a lot of different manners in which this can manifest. But the aside of chol hamoed is the opportunity for us to express ourselves as bnei chayrin, and that will memela put us in a position in which we are doimet to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are closer to God because we are more similar to Him. And that is much, much, much deeper and much, much more, I don't want to say much more important, but it's a much deeper way to get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu than relating to Him, than doing an act of relating to Him. Becoming similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is much more deep and much better version, I don't know better, but it's a much deeper version of getting closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, very good.